Well, thank you, Luce, for that introduction and for the opportunity to speak here today at the conference to present the views on where to from here from the perspective of Australian-based truck manufacturers and importers. It gives me also an opportunity to build upon the previous two speakers, whom I note Michael's comments. And also Gary Mahn's comments about the transitionary nature of our heavy vehicle task going forward, and also the issue of groupthink. And I'm sorry for the fact that the moment just caught me, but I'm going to go back to Michael's comments. Michael's comments are very apt, I believe. I've just come back from America, and the simple fact of the matter over there is that there is a crunch time coming in this debate. And I have held this view for the last 18 months, my experiences in politics and the public sector, and I believe that there is a moment coming when we will see just how far this future goes as such, where it will go from here. So reimagining the future of heavy vehicles, roads and freights means that we need to look to the future, and ever present to that future is the challenge of decarbonisation. I'll start with one historical fact. The Industrial Revolution took 80 years to occur across the globe from its beginnings in England in 1760 with the spinning jenny. To address climate change, the world is being called upon to reindustrialise, to structurally readjust the economy as we know it. New power, new engines and new ways of doing things. And we only have 25 years to do it. This obviously is no small undertaking. Technology is evolving faster than ever, and as Chris said in his opening address, human decisions need to be made by industry, like the manufacturers TIC represents, by freight businesses who are guided by commercial, productivity and operational efficiency considerations, by political and public sector actors, and last but not least, by the public, whose expectations desire that all road users are able to share the roads safely with heavy vehicles, and who desire action to be taken on environmental outcomes in terms of reducing noxious emissions and carbon pollution. To reimagine the future of heavy vehicles, roads and freight, I believe it is time for our polity to reimagine itself. Consultation with industry has to mean exactly that. Not the communication tick-off exercise it has become, where feedback provided in good faith by industry is not factored into policy and technical decisions, which it seems is increasingly being made in a vacuum. It is against this backdrop that Australian-based truck manufacturers and importers find themselves. All stakeholders around the world face the challenge of defining the purpose of roads and managing the interface between the motoring public and the freight being carried by heavy vehicles, critical for a strong economy and an improved standard of living. On Wednesday, Sal Petrosito reminded us that we all have customers. I believe there is a gap between what the public, our customers, expect is good policy and what they perceive as actually being delivered, all within a framework principally focused upon reducing carbon emissions and improving road safety outcomes. Both are strategic problems that we as a nation and industry face. This, on a number of fronts, guides the theme of my speech today: ambition meeting reality, the case for the transition of the heavy vehicle fleet. So where to from here? Firstly, the Australian context. Australian trucks operate in conditions unique to anywhere else in the world. A decentralised population base located across vast distances, longer, heavier combinations than the rest of the world, higher average speeds, extreme heat, dust, and a vast network of sealed and unsealed roads. Heavy vehicle regulation is aligned with the European regulations, with Australia being a signatory to the 1958 UN Convention. Where possible, we adopt the US and Japanese regulation as alternatives, making fair and equitable regulation setting a challenge for regulators. This means that the majority of OEMs test and market their product in these unique conditions, making Australia the most competitive market in the world. Regulation in Australia occurs at both the federal and state levels, adding to the opportunity for delayed and inconsistent application of regulation and policy development. Federal regulation pertains to the point at which the truck is first supplied to the market. In-service use of the truck is controlled by state regulation. Australia is a technology taker, representing only 1% of world sales. Dictating an Australian solution to regulation often comes at a cost to industry. Our unique 2.5 metre width regulation is testament to this. Australia's axle mass allowances are out of step with most other regions in the world and the desire for a zero-emission future. As hard as it is to believe, we are revisiting the turn of the 20th century when each Australian state had different rail gauges. Just a few weeks ago, the states of New South Wales and South Australia announced significant mass concessions for zero-emission vehicles. We now have, for zero-emission vehicles, different axle mass limits across states. Not a good example of polity working well. Australia has a slow fleet turnover, as evidenced by the high average age of our fleet, meaning that the adoption of new technologies is poor within the existing fleet. Sales of low and zero emission vehicles have remained low, very low. Last year, 27 zero emission vehicles were sold. The figure for hybrid vehicles was 72. 99 low emission vehicles sold in a record year of 44,379. Customer inquiry is increasing, borne by ESG thinking. Barriers are being overcome, but still for the majority of operators, prevents the uptake of new technology vehicles. TIC's projections are that by 2030, 1 in 4 trucks sold will be a low or zero emission vehicle. Now that might sound promising, but another number tells a different story. This means that by 2030, TIC estimates 2% of the fleet will be zero emission vehicle, with 1% being hybrid electric vehicles. 98% of our fleet will still require diesel. Predicting beyond 2030 is difficult because beyond existing hybrid battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell technologies, the reality is that OEMs are working on various technologies to satisfy the task at hand and the needs of customers, as no single current technology can achieve carbon neutrality across the freight sector. Upon winning the election last year, the centre-left Albanese government legislated a 43% reduction in CO2 emissions below the 2005 level by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Herein lays the challenge of how to decarbonise the nation's truck fleet and by doing so, the nation's roads and freight. In light of this Australian context, the second point I would like to address is how does TIC reimagine the future of heavy vehicles? In a word, transition. This might seem obvious, but the debates, the policy that I get involved in, there is only one answer, and that clearly is zero or nothing. There is no debate about a transition, it's just the target of zero. Ambition is a good thing. Reality, however, would suggest the need for a transition. I say this based upon known facts as they stand today and a reasonable interpretation of what we see sales will look like through to 2030. The average age of a truck in Australia is 15 years. There are almost 750,000 diesel trucks on our roads. 56% of our fleet is pre-2008 Euro 4 technologies. These trucks are operating in and around our cities, often on their fourth and fifth lives. There is no possibility for these fleets to be changed overnight, replaced overnight. Achieving the ambition set by government will not be a light switch moment for the heavy vehicle fleet. The starting point in Australia is for all stakeholders to acknowledge the need for a realistic transition plan, one that will reimagine how the nation views its heavy vehicles, its roads and its freight. The role of TIC is to advocate to stakeholders a realistic pathway forward to achieving reduced CO2 emissions. In doing so, we achieve a safer truck fleet, given that for every new clean truck sold, that truck is by its nature a safer truck because of the advanced technologies employed on it. The real issue before us all in road freight transport at the moment is how we ensure ambition meets reality. Interest in this transition amongst various stakeholders is strong, particularly in light of the fact that the transport sector is a major contributor to CO2 emissions and is recognised by government as being a hard-to-abate sector. The actions being taken by truck manufacturers and importers to bring to market the latest technologically advanced low and zero emission product in response to the challenges of climate change, public expectation and the objectives of government is of much discussion. While the long-term trajectory certainly embraces a shift towards electrification, the industry recognises at present no single technology is capable of achieving carbon neutrality across the sector. The key message that TIC has been advocating to government is that while ambition is apt when tackling the challenge of climate change, policy discussion and determination must reflect the economic and engineering reality of the OEMs. What operators are prepared to pay for the vehicle, the decision to purchase, after all, requires confidence in the technology, fuel availability and a positive business case. And just as importantly, what the public is willing to pay in terms of the cost of goods, the cost of delivery, and increased taxes required to compensate operators from moving from the undesired state to the desired state. TIC advocates technological neutrality, allowing truck OEMs and their customers to determine the best technology to achieve carbon reduction. Attempting to pick and back the winning technology is a brave undertaking. Multiple approaches provide a more practical and sustainable pathway to carbon neutrality in Australia. All truck OEMs are working on these technologies to solve the challenges. Various technologies will need to be considered depending on the task at hand and will require a realistic transition plan and timeline for the road freight sector to be put into place. A plan that aligns with government, industry and public expectations. Society and government have set the climate change goal. Industry will deliver technology options and require flexibility and financial and regulatory assistance to achieve this. Our sector has a sound record of introducing advanced technologies to the market for the betterment of operators and, just as importantly, society. Look no further than the noxious and carbon emission reducing technologies or the advanced safety technologies employed on today's trucks. No single government policy or industry commitment alone will achieve this ambitious goal. We must work collaboratively at all levels of government to identify the range of approaches necessary to establish a sustainable pathway to carbon neutrality. The starting point in Australia is for all stakeholders, government, the public sector and operators alike to acknowledge the need for a transition plan. This, as I have said, is not a light switch moment. But what it is a structural adjustment of the economy that requires a plan for heavy vehicles, roads and freight. From the OEM perspective, the transition to a heavy vehicle low zero emission future has already started. OEMs voluntarily have introduced Euro 6 technologies years ahead of when it was mandated by the federal government. With each new Euro 6 truck comes the advanced fuel savings, resulting in up to 7% less fuel used and less CO2. There is a role for low emission trucks already in the market, such as hybrid electric technologies, which save between 20 and 30% CO2 emissions. Further measures include paving the way for the use of low carbon renewable diesel blends for use across the existing fleet, an approach not receiving a lot of attention by governments in Australia. Removing regulatory impediments that prevent high productivity vehicles from accessing more of the Australian road network. In other words, moving more with less truck movements and less CO2. Allowing 7-tonne axle mass on the steer axle for Euro 6 trucks, and further nationally consistent increases to axle mass for low and zero emission vehicles across states to compensate for the extra weight of these new technology vehicles. My third and final point pertains to the human decisions to be made within our polity. From my experience, policy around heavy vehicles, roads and freight has long been seen operationally by government decision makers as a set of singular transactions, such as the recent width decision, without tying it together with the obvious mass allowances, both necessary for a zero-emission future. The alternative is to look at these human decisions through the lens of addressing the vision of national economic reform, noting the critical importance the distribution channel plays. This goes to the heart of the question raised by Steve Shearer of SATA on Wednesday, and the importance of data in allocating monies for road infrastructure. I understand the role of the road manager to maximise the use of the road asset. However, road managers need to point out to their secretaries and their ministers the true cost of achieving the ambition of reduced emissions from the freight sector, instead of just saying no to transport operators with regard to access. That cost being, of course, the upgrading of bridges, pavements to carry the heavy zero-emission vehicles, which are necessary to achieve the government's, cabinet's and public's expectations on climate change. Industry has no choice if the public expectation is for zero-emission vehicles. These vehicles are heavier and society will need to pay for the structural adjustment that climate change brings. The point also needs to be made that zero emissions cannot be achieved through technology adoption only. Behavioural change is part of the solution. Operators making decisions to renew old trucks, operators changing to low carbon fuels, customers consolidating orders, and governments introducing meaningful incentives. I stated earlier, the real issue before us all in road freight transport at the moment is to strive to ensure that ambition meets reality. This requires reimagining how our polity works, how society, government and stakeholders, the humans, as Chris said, think about the challenges we have in order to answer the question, where to from here? The immediate action is to transition the existing fleet. The long-term strategy, however, is more encompassing and goes to the heart of how we in Australia reimagine the future of heavy vehicles, roads and freight. Ministers, policy officers, road managers, regulators and industry need to move beyond policy and regulation developed by the principles of lowest common denominator, that is, the path of least resistance, to policy and regulation that is aspirational for a first world country like Australia, which is so dependent upon its heavy vehicles and roads for freight. Policy and regulation that removes barriers, provides incentives, and aspires to the objective of a modern distribution channel and a modern Australian truck fleet. The role of freight needs to be prioritised nationally, with the appointment of a Federal Minister for Freight, and with it will come the elevation of heavy vehicles and a road network that works for freight, be it rural, regional, urban or long haul. Where to from here? To use the current vernacular, that is a good question, and it behoves us all to play a part together in how we achieve our future. Thank you.